Chapter 1: The Christmas I Realized I Was Invisible. I never planned to destroy my boss's career. I planned to survive Christmas. But when he raised his glass, turned my years of work into a joke, and the room laughed, something shifted. Because what he didn't know was this: I was the one who kept every record, every approval, every decision they hoped no one would trace back. My name is Marianne, and this story didn't begin with revenge. It began with a Christmas toast that said more than he ever meant to say. I woke up before my alarm that morning, the kind of quiet December dawn where the house feels suspended between night and obligation. The coffee maker hummed softly while I stood at the counter scrolling through emails on my phone, already skimming subject lines about year-end numbers and final approvals. 14 years of habit had trained my eyes to look for problems before they arrived. My daughter was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, hair pulled into a loose knot, surrounded by half-printed forms. She was home from college for winter break, but her mind was clearly somewhere else. She told me she was finishing applications for summer internships and needed one more letter of recommendation. She said it casually, but I heard the weight under it. This mattered to her. She paused, then asked me something that made my hand still on the coffee mug. She asked how I knew when it was time to speak up at work. I smiled in the automatic way I had learned over years of meetings, and nodded as if the question were simple. I told her there was no single moment, that every situation was different. I said something about timing and professionalism. It sounded reasonable. It sounded empty. She looked at me for a second longer than usual, like she could tell I had dodged something. Then she went back to her screen. I kissed the top of her head, grabbed my coat, and told myself I would think about her question later. Downtown was already busy when I arrived at the office. Holiday decorations lined the lobby, tasteful and expensive in that corporate way. I had been at this firm long enough to remember when we rented 2 floors and shared a printer. Now we occupied 8 floors and hosted clients who flew in on private jets. I had joined the company in 2011, back when it was a small advisory group trying to look bigger than it was. I grew with it. I learned every system, every client pattern, every operational shortcut that kept the place running smoothly. Somewhere along the way, I became indispensable without becoming visible. That morning, I was finalizing the year-end operations report while also reviewing the draft of the CEO's speech for the holiday party. Fourth quarter numbers had shifted slightly after a late client adjustment, so I updated the figures and sent a note flagging the changes. I had done this hundreds of times before. An hour before the rehearsal, the CEO's assistant messaged me asking me to come to the conference room. When I walked in, the screen was already lit up with slides. The CEO stood at the front, remote in hand, chatting easily with 2 senior partners. As the slides advanced, something felt off. I scanned the leadership contributions page, the one that usually listed department heads responsible for execution. My name was gone. I waited, assuming it was a mistake. When the slide deck reached the end, I spoke up, keeping my tone neutral. I mentioned that the leadership slide looked different from the previous version. He glanced at the screen, then at me, and said it was cleaner this way. He said the focus should stay on vision, not logistics. Then he added, almost casually, that if any of the numbers were questioned later, I should be ready to explain them, since I was closest to the data. The room stayed quiet. No one objected. No one looked surprised. I nodded, because that was what I always did. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a private message from the head of human resources. She said the seating plan for the holiday party had been finalized and asked that I not sit at the main table. She said the CEO wanted clients and board guests there and hoped I would understand. I stared at the message longer than I should have. I understood perfectly. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of confirmations and last-minute approvals. People stopped by my desk to thank me for pulling everything together, to ask small questions, to tell me how excited they were for the party. I smiled and answered, the reliable center of gravity I had trained myself to be. At one point, I found myself alone in a conference room, gathering printed handouts. The space was quiet, chairs pushed back, the city visible through the glass walls. The CEO walked in, loosened his tie, and made a comment about how exhausting this season always was. He looked at me and said I was great at keeping things running. He said leadership required people who enjoyed the spotlight, people who thrived on being seen. He laughed lightly, like it was a shared understanding. I laughed too, because that was easier than saying anything else. After he left, I stayed there for a moment, holding the stack of papers against my chest. I thought about how many late nights I had spent fixing problems no one else wanted to touch. I thought about how often stability was praised in private and dismissed in public. I told myself I had chosen this. I told myself that consistency mattered more than recognition, especially when you were a single parent and benefits and predictability kept your life from tipping over. I told myself all the things I had been telling myself for years. But as I checked my calendar and saw the holiday party marked in bold that evening, something shifted. I thought about my daughter at the kitchen table, asking me how you knew when to speak up at work. I thought about what my silence had been teaching her all this time. I shut down the conference room lights, walked back to my desk and gathered my things. Outside, the sky was already dark, the city glowing with reflected lights. The party was in a few hours. I would attend. I would smile. I would do what I always did. But for the first time, I could not shake the feeling that this Christmas was about to show me exactly how invisible I had allowed myself to become.
Chapter 2. His Toast and the Room That Went Quiet. The hotel lobby was already glowing when I arrived that evening, all warm light and polished stone, the kind of place designed to make success feel effortless. A decorated tree stood near the entrance, ornaments reflecting the movement of people in tailored suits and cocktail dresses. I paused long enough to smooth my jacket and remind myself that this was still my workplace, even if it rarely felt like it belonged to me. Inside the ballroom, the noise swelled in waves. Laughter, clinking glasses, low music humming beneath conversations about travel plans and bonus rumors. I scanned the room out of habit, noting who was present, who had arrived with clients, who was already positioning themselves near the center. My name was on a table card halfway back, surrounded by department managers and project leads. Good people, hard workers. None of us sat at the main table was closer to the stage, reserved for the executive team, board members, and key clients. I recognized several faces from video calls and site visits. They nodded politely when they saw me, the way people do when they are not sure how much attention to give. I took my seat and accepted a glass of wine from a passing server. The room felt festive, but there was a tension underneath it that I could not quite place. Maybe it was just the end-of-year fatigue. Maybe it was me. When Victor stepped onto the stage, the room quieted instinctively. He had a presence that filled space without effort. He smiled easily, lifted his glass, and waited until the last murmurs faded. He began by thanking everyone for another successful year. He talked about growth, resilience, adaptability. He praised the firm for navigating uncertainty and coming out stronger. Heads nodded around the room. People smiled. This was familiar territory. Then his tone shifted slightly. He said he wanted to share a story about what really made success possible behind the scenes. He spoke about dedication and long hours, about the people who made sure things ran smoothly so leaders could focus on the bigger picture. I felt a tightening in my chest, a small warning I had learned not to ignore. He said there were people who excelled at support, who were invaluable precisely because they did not seek the spotlight. He said leadership required a different kind of energy, the ability to move fast, to make bold decisions without being slowed down by process. The room chuckled softly. I stared at the stem of my glass. Then he said that some people were meant to support greatness, not become it. The laughter was louder this time, not cruel, not malicious, but unmistakable, the kind of laughter that signals understanding. I did not look up. I did not need to. I knew exactly where that sentence had landed. I felt heat rise in my face, then recede into something colder. My body stayed still, trained by years of meetings not to react. Around me, people shifted in their seats. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else took a long sip of wine. When the applause came, I clapped along with everyone else, my hands moving automatically while my mind raced. I wondered if Victor realized how exposed he had just made me, or if that was the point. As the noise settled, the person seated beside me leaned slightly closer. He was a senior partner from a client firm, someone I had worked closely with on several complex projects. His voice was low, careful. He asked if that was how our company viewed senior leadership. I turned my head just enough to meet his eyes. For a second, I considered the safest answer, a deflection, a reassurance, but every option felt dishonest. The words stuck somewhere between my throat and my teeth. I told him that leadership meant different things to different people. It sounded to my own ears. He nodded slowly, not convinced, and leaned back in his chair. I knew what he was thinking. I knew what he would remember. On stage, Victor raised his glass again, smiling broadly, clearly pleased with himself. The band began to play. Servers moved through the aisles. The party resumed as if nothing had happened. That was when I noticed Elaine. She sat at the main table, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She had not laughed, she had not clapped. She set her glass down with deliberate care and stood. A few people noticed and looked confused. She nodded to Victor briefly, then turned and walked toward the exit. She did not smile. She simply inclined her head once and continued on. Something in my chest loosened just slightly. The rest of the evening unfolded around me in fragments. Conversations drifted in and out. People congratulated each other. Someone asked me about a project timeline. Someone else joked about year-end burnout. I answered, smiled, listened. I played my role. But underneath it all, my mind replayed Victor's words. Not just the sentence itself, but the confidence with which he had delivered it. The assumption that he could define my play without consequence. I remembered the training modules we completed every year, the sections on respectful communication, maintaining a professional environment, on avoiding public disparagement. I remembered clicking through them late at night, half distracted, never imagining they would apply to someone at his level. I sipped my wine and switched to water. The exits more. I noticed how some people avoided my eyes now, uncertain how to engage. I noticed how others offered extra warmth, as if to compensate. At one point, Rachel from Human by my table. She asked if I was enjoying the evening. Her smile was tight. I told her it was a beautiful venue. She nodded and moved on without meeting my eyes again. When the dessert plates were cleared and the music grew louder, I stood and made my way toward the back of the room. I did not worry. I felt something more. I felt defined. Victor had said quiet aloud in front of clients, board members, and people whose opinions mattered. He had drawn a line and I was standing clearly on one side of it. As I stepped into the hallway outside the ballroom, the noise dulled me. Carpet muffled my footsteps. For a moment, I stood there, breathing in the cooler air, letting the reality settle. The laughter echoed. Glasses still clinked. The party went on. But I knew, with a clarity that surprised me,